Thank you for joining the Good and Terrible Show. Welcome everybody to the Good and Terrible Show. My name is Travis,
My name is
and this is Mickey. That is Mickey, and we got a special episode for y'all today. We got some cool guests here. Got a round table going on for you today. We're going to be discussing cultural appropriation. Before we kick it off, I just want to go around the room with our three guests here and tell them your names and tell them a little bit about your cultural background. You know, where your family's from, your ethnicity, where you might have lived, different places like that, so they kind of get a feel of where you're coming from and your perspective for today's episode. So why don't we start it off with Shantae, and then we'll go to Marquita, and then we'll finish off here with Joseph.
Cool. So I'm Shantae. I was born in Tampa, Florida. I lived in Florida, moved to Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania, where there were very few people that looked like me. Most of them lived in my own house. And then I moved to Maryland and now Texas. So I've been a little bit of everywhere. So I've seen a lot of different things, a lot of different cultures. So I've been exposed to a bit.
Cool. Marquita?
Hi, my name is Marquita. I was actually born here in Fairfax County, Virginia. Recently, I just moved back. I lived in Texas for quite a number of years. And just like Shantae, I was quite one that kind of looked like me, talked like me. So I was exposed to a different culture being in Texas rather than being in Virginia.
And Joseph?
My name is Joseph. I was born in Ghana, West Africa. Moved to the States when I was around 7 and have lived in Northern Virginia pretty much since, with different, traveling across the states just to see what the state has to offer, because I got peoples in New York, shout out Travis, and I got peoples in Minnesota. So pretty wide range there.
Cool. And then obviously, everybody out there, you guys know who we are. Myself, Mickey, you guys been watching us for a few months now. So, like I said, today we're going to be talking about cultural appropriation. So, to kick it off, I'm just kind of going to read the inspiration. I found this cool snippet online that was the inspiration for today's discussion. I'm just going to kick it off by reading it, and then we're going to kind of open up the round table here. So, throughout history, artists have found deep inspiration from cultures outside their own. Today, there is increasing awareness about cultural appropriation and ongoing debates about when or if it's acceptable to adopt aspects of another culture's practices or forms. Where does appreciation end and appropriation begin? And I think that's a really good question. I know I have, some thoughts myself, and, I think, today me and Mickey are going to kind of administer the conversation and then, put our feedback in at the end. But, we really brought you guys here because you guys, are from, different parts of the country, different backgrounds. And, even though we're all Black on this panel here, a lot of people have the misconception that all Black people grew up the same. So we all have different aspects of where we grew up and different perspectives here. So I want to hear about you. Actually, I'm going to kick it off, Joseph, since you do have, an international background here. What's your thoughts, or what's your definition of cultural appropriation before we kind of get into, the discussion of the differences here?
Thanks, Travis. So as a Black person from Africa, I kind of came to this conversation a little bit late, but glad to be included. When I think about cultural appropriation, I think of a few different things. 3 things that make it problematic, because I still have a tension with the term itself. But the 3 things which make cultural appropriation problematic is it's the adoption of someone's cultural, what I would call like identity markers. But the person who's taking on the other identity markers is able to leave and enter those identity markers as they please. Usually when it's convenient or to their advantage, and usually they're the person who's leaving and entering the identity markers is from a predominant culture. Here in America, the culture is usually Black, white, that's where we usually have that discussion on. So it's problematic for that reason, the leaving and entering, putting on when it's an advantage to you versus when it's not. And then I think another element which we often find is that credit isn't being given where credit is deserved. So you can think of a number of and I'll definitely be willing to talk about some when we get to questions to follow.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that in a second.
But
all right, Marquita.
credit isn't being given.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, I think that's a really good definition, and I like a few different points of what you said that I'm going to get to in a little bit. Marquita, I'm going to kick it off to you and what your general thoughts are and what's your definition of cultural appropriation, being for somebody that, grew up over here in this country and, somebody who, might look a little bit different, might have a different name than some other people. What's your thoughts?
Well, I was just going to start off by saying it's definitely hard to follow up after Joseph. I think he definitely hit the hammer on the nail. He did a very good job of explaining it. And I would kind of explain it in the same format. So for me, growing up, I grew up in Manassas, and this is obviously back in the 90s. And one thing about Manassas is at that time, it wasn't a lot of people who had brown skin. You had white people who had money, who grew up, just regular average, and then you had the people that look like me, or the minorities, who a lot of them were Hispanic or Black people, and we all lived in one neighborhood. So our neighborhood was obviously assumed very bad, which it was. So going to school, you went to school with a lot of white people, and one thing that I could say, watching hands-on, was them trying to adapt to all culture because of it trying to be in or thought of as cool. Because when your mom has a tight rope on you and you see other kids are doing whatever they want, or they're in the streets, or they're out past dark, and that's looked at as cool, you start to do things and pick up things because you want to fit in and you want to feel cool. So I think because there's a line between, like Joseph said, this Black and white community, it's looked at as, let me do this for now, but if it comes back to me, I don't have nothing to do with that. I can go back to being who I really am. But if the tables are turned, and for example, I'm in the shoes of me being a Black woman, and I do something like, for example, go to a Louis Vuitton store, you're gonna look at me and you're probably assuming that I'm stealing and I don't fit there. I'm not supposed to be there. So I think when we go places or we do things, we adapt to the culture, or we adapt to what we think we have to adapt to.
Now,
so
do you think that that's an example of appropriation, or would you think that that's more of, being when you become into you're self-adapting to your environment? Do you think that that's a form of appropriation, or do you think that that's more just self-adapting?
Well, I think it's kind of both, because like if you take what Joseph said and you do it because it's convenient, is the word I think he used, then you're kind of doing both, right? So
Right.
when it's less convenient, or you feel like it's not useful anymore, then you're done with whatever you just adapted to. So I think it's kind of both, because when you use it in the sense of, okay, let me go out, or if I see someone that I think maybe, like, for example, maybe back in the day when, we were wearing bell bottoms and hoop earrings and puffballs and things like that.
Yeah.
And we were looked at with like that little look that, people would give you. But when you turn it around and it's like, okay, well, let's have a party. It's the 80 parties. And you see people with the puffballs and the bell bottoms and the earrings. I think it becomes one of those things, like I said, again, it's in. So you take it, you do whatever you want to it. And then when you're done,
Right.
you're done. So I think it's kind of both. And I guess in the sense of how I'm looking at it, in my opinion.
Okay, cool. Shantae, we're gonna get to you in 1 second. Marquita, you was wearing puffballs?
No, my hair would never hold up. But
Okay.
if I could,
Just wanted to make sure we asked that question.
It wouldn't hold up. But I would definitely do it. Nikki knows me. I will try anything with this hair on my head.
Okay, Shantae, you got anything to add in terms of your definition of what cultural appropriation means to you? You're on mute right now, sweetheart.
My bad.
There you
So I think that I agree with both Joseph and Marquita, just for the simple fact that, there's a general definition of what cultural appropriation is, but there's a difference between cultural appropriation and social biases and norms. So I think that's what we adapt to, is social biases and norms, you know, just adapting to the culture that's around us, because it's inevitable. For me, cultural appropriation is basically gaining something from adapting something from a different culture. So going to what Marquita was saying about adapting to what's around us, a good example would be, say, for me, I go into, say, like beauty shops. Typically you go into a beauty shop, or, you know, you're going to pick up hair for braiding or whatever, you don't necessarily see someone behind the counter that looks like you, but they're
That's a very
gaining
good
from
point.
our culture. You know what I
I was
mean?
just going to ask
So
if you think that's a form of appropriation too, because a lot of times, not
absolutely.
even just you know, beauty shops, you might see, you know, like, you know, hair salons, nail salons, you know, hair
Right.
stores, different things like you were just talking about. A lot of times they might be, you know, a particular race, you know, and or a
Hmm.
particular ethnicity, and a lot of times you kind of see them pandering to who their audience is. You know, a lot of times you'll find them in our neighborhoods across the country. Do you think that that's a form of appropriation on their part, or do you think it's just, you know, marketing and business?
You know, I think it could be looked at both ways depending on how they approach it. Just for the simple fact that, like Marquita was saying, you can go into a Louis Vuitton store and they could be viewing us as, oh, well, they're going to steal because of the skin of our or the color of our skin. But if we go into, say, a beauty shop to just pick up braiding hair, yeah, they gain, or not saying everybody, but they gain monetarily from us buying from them, but they also may view us as, oh, well, this person is going to steal, or this and that and the other. So I think there's a monetary gain behind it, and it's appropriating because you're willing to gain from us, but you don't trust us.
Mm.
You're
Ooh, dropping some
gaining.
dimes. Dropping some dimes.
So I think it's you're gaining without giving us, it's credit where credit is due. You know, you gain from us, but you're not willing to give us the credit that we're deserved, because without us, you wouldn't be here. You
Okay.
wouldn't be able
All
to gain
good.
from that.
All good inputs from all three of y'all, and I certainly thank y'all for your opinions there. So now I'm gonna, you know, kind of open it up to, you know, the whole group and make it yourself. I got, you know, we got some good questions here, some hard hitting facts. Let's dive deep into this because I like where this is going, and all three of y'all are out here dropping some knowledge for these folks. So number one, so being that we're all a black panel here, all five of us are, you know, considered black, you know, different, you know, cultural backgrounds, but all within the diaspora was considered black. So do you think that it is just something, when you hear cultural appropriation, do you think it's just something that black people can be victims of, or do you think that it can be cross cultural for, like, no matter what the culture is?
It's definitely cross culture, because there's been plenty of times where I know of my audience and my situation, so I know that I can't go in there being Marquita, because I'm looked at as, okay, she gonna walk in and she's gonna be this loud, obnoxious individual. And I remember when I started the job with you guys, I remember I won't say the name, but one of the coworkers said, why you don't use your middle name, knowing that my middle name is Michelle. So they asked, why do you use Marquita? Do you think that you don't get callbacks because of the name that you're leaving? And for me, I was confused, because I'm like, what does my name have to do with anything? But when I really thought about it, I thought about how it could play a significant factor, because when you hear the name Marquita and you may not know how to say it and you may be misspelling it, then it comes with, I believe, negativity. And I'm not saying I believe it, because it has been my entire life. So I do think when you go to certain places or you have a certain audience, then you are who you, like we were saying earlier, adapting to. So yes,
Mm,
like for me, I would say there's been plenty of places when I go into maybe an interview or wherever the case may be, there's been times where I'm like, I may not want to wear my natural hair today, depending on how they feel. So I have to adapt and see how they will truly feel if I do get the job or if I don't get the job. So yeah, you're right.
okay.
I go in there maybe with straight hair, or, I may not wear what I would usually wear. But yeah, I think it's both ways. I believe Black people are more victims of it? Yes, absolutely. But I do think that because of who we are and the situations that we're put in, we do it as well.
So that's a good, this conversation actually just took like an interesting turn here. So when I think of cultural appropriation here, I'm thinking of like utilizing somebody else's, um, you know, cultural norms or you know, some of their traditions for profit, you know, for me to kind of gain an advantage. You know what I'm saying? We'll get to that in a second. But what you're kind of saying is that you know, as a Black person now might, you know, adjust yourself and kind of, you know, utilize more of, let's say, a Caucasian culture, not necessarily for profit, but for gain in a different way, like to kind of further, you know, your career or something like that. That's an interesting perspective here. So like, it's kind of like you're not necessarily, you're actually kind of being like pushed to do cultural appropriation yourself, maybe involuntary cultural appropriation, if that makes sense.
I mean,
I,
absolutely.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Joseph.
I think what may be the difference with Marquitha's instance is that Marquitha's adoption of what would you could identify as identity markers isn't giving her so much a leg up as it is leveling the playing field in
Yeah.
a society where she would otherwise be disadvantaged.
Mm, okay. I'm gonna open this up. Mickey, you're welcome to comment too. So do you think that, well, just because of where we went right now, I'm kind of piggybacking off that. Do you think that Black people can culturally appropriate other cultures as well? Not even just like in that instance there, but do you think, for example, like I'm a big fan of Taco Tuesday. I'm fat. So I love tacos and I love celebrating Taco Tuesday. Do you think that something like that, or maybe like Cinco de Mayo or something like that, might be like Black people culturally appropriating, you know, the Latin or the Mexican or the Hispanic culture or something like that? Like, do you think we ourselves can also do cultural appropriation in a certain way?
I think we can, but I think that it's hard to say sometimes because just like I was looking at a picture of Beyonce, it was a video where she was dressed in like Indian garb and she had the henna
Hmm.
and the nose ring and I believe it's called the sari. If I'm saying
Hmm.
that incorrectly, I'm sorry guys. And some people took offense to that, but at the same time, I don't feel like Beyonce was trying to culturally appropriate them. I think she was just showing respect to that culture because it's beautiful. Like I got henna for my birthday on my hand and I love henna, but I'm not doing it to be like, oh, like this is like a costume. I actually like the way, you know, it looks and I'm not trying to gain anything from it. But at the same time, it's like you don't know how the other culture or the other race feels about it. So for Black people, I feel like because we're taken advantage of so much, we kind of understand how other races would feel. Like you said with Taco Tuesday, I don't think you celebrating Taco Tuesday is cultural appropriation. I think if you're making a mockery of it and saying something negative, it is. But
Hmm.
it's kind of hard to speak from like for example, if you were Mexican and I'm Black, I couldn't tell you how to feel as a Mexican person and say, well, you shouldn't feel like that because I'm just celebrating Taco Tuesday. But that person that is Mexican may feel like I'm piggybacking off of it and I'm just making fun of it, almost like a Halloween thing. Like you put on a costume and then you take it off.
Right.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes back to the original question that we had, you know, with the snippet, you know, from online. So where do you guys think the I know there's a fine line between appreciating somebody's culture and, you know, paying respects to that culture or celebrating that culture, wanting to participate in it, right? There's a fine line between that and then a cultural appropriation where you know, kind of abuse it. Where do y'all think that line is? And, you know, do you have like a specific example of what you know would want to name for what kind of a positive versus a negative?
So for me, I thought about this and I started conversations just because of this podcast. I started conversations with other people, and the main idea that I came up with or example was if you take Eminem and then you take Machine Gun Kelly or you take G-Eazy, I think it's where it's more of like they all have gained from, you know, being rappers or whatever, this and that and the other. And it's arguably true that Eminem is one of the best rappers. That's always going to be an argument between whomever. And so my whole thing is that the difference is Eminem has given back to the culture. He has given credit where credit is due, even though he has monetarily gained from it. Whereas you don't see so much from G-Eazy and Machine Gun Kelly. They're just going with the flow, doing their thing. Not saying that they're good, bad, or indifferent, but Eminem has given credit and he's actually extended an olive branch for our people to actually come up in the same way.
Mm.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And you know, I actually got in a similar argument with somebody probably about a year ago. Somebody, you know, was talking about Bruno Mars, and they were calling him a cultural appropriator. You know, this is, you know, when he,
Mhm.
you know, came out with his most recent album a couple of years back. Um, and you know, he was dropping a lot of like what we would call like traditional like R&B or even like funk music, different stuff like that. And they
Mhm.
were saying, you know, because he's not black, you know, they were accusing him of like acting black, but even though I'm not actually sure what Bruno Mars, I actually think he does have some black
He
ethnicity in
is.
him,
I
He
think
but
is
so
that's not
too.
like, yeah.
okay. But even if he wasn't, let's say hypothetically speaking, if he wasn't, at that point, I was arguing I don't think he was culturally appropriating because,
Mm-mm.
you know, he said from day one, and you can even go back and look at like videos of him when he was a kid. He's always respected, you know, Michael Jackson.
The
He's
culture.
always respected, you know, like funk music, different things like that. So I think, and I don't think he was necessarily exploiting black culture either. I think he was actually showing, you know, appreciation
Appreciation.
and yeah, exactly. So like that's kind of like what I'm talking about there. So I feel like there needs to be kind of a set in stone example of what cultural appropriation or a set in stone definition of what cultural appropriation is, even though it might be a little bit subjective. So like I guess, you know, my next question to you guys would be, who do you think is the biggest culprits of cultural appropriation? Do you think it's like regular people, everyday people like you and me, or do you think it's more like on the celebrity level?
I think it's in the middle. If you think about how everyone is getting famous nowadays, and I'm sorry, I'm just kind of throwing in there.
Yeah.
But I think it's not necessarily celebrities or it happens, but it doesn't happen as often as I think, you know, Instagram famous and Snapchat famous. I think it's more of that social media platform where it happens the most, because if you think about celebrities, they have a niche, they have something that they're good at, they know where they fit in. And yeah, sometimes it'll happen, but they know how to maneuver. Whereas if you're Instagram famous, you're Snapchat famous, you're really doing it for shock value to get your following up. So I think it happens more in that platform. And yeah, you can call it celebrity or whatever, but I think it happens a lot there. And that's where I see it. And that's where a lot of the problems come in, because if you look at who has the biggest problems, it's usually, you know, social media personalities.
Mm,
So
Yeah, I would agree with Shantae with that, because I mean, the world that we live in, everything is social media, right? And you have young girls that look up to celebrities, and they have like hair tutorials, or they have nail tutorials, or makeup tutorials, or whatever the case may be. But I think there's a fine line between a lot of these young girls not knowing where they belong, so who they do look up to and what the culture that they're adapting, then that's something that they feel like they need to do in order to drive those viewers. So I think like a big thing right now is like the baby hair thing, right? I think it's super just like weird, but I mean, you see these YouTube videos of these girls who are still school age girls, and that may not look like me or Shantae or Mickey, and they're teaching me how to lay baby hairs. So it's
Everybody's fascinated with the edges these days, right?
right. So it's I think in the sense of where your question was, Travis, I think a lot of it has to do with everyday people like us. But I think it's because everyday people goal is to eventually, obviously, to drive in a certain direction, and a lot of those directions nowadays is just so happens to be social media related, and a lot of these kids or teenagers or whatever the case may be get money from that when everyday people view those
Hmm.
videos or whatever the case may be. So then they become really popular, and
Hmm.
when they become popular, they never had time to really find themselves. So I think the culture appropriation becomes something that they don't know how to give back, or state that they borrowed it, or state that it's not something that would be regular, or something that would actually be in the norm for them because of what they've seen or what they've been taught or things of that nature.
What about you, Mickey? We ain't heard from you in a little bit. You're on mute.
Yeah. I agree with Marquise on that. Something else I was thinking about, there's a term called blackfishing, which I found out about recently. They're basically white women who are tanning, wearing makeup,
Oh, yes.
and when I saw it, I was like, is she black? And I was like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind because I never heard that before. And a girl that I follow on Instagram, her name is Johnny Red. She did a YouTube video about it and found several pages. I mean, these girls are maybe teenagers
Yeah.
all the way to like 20s. And Bad Baby, who's the girl from the Dr. Phil episode,
Bad Barbie.
whatever her name is, bad parenting is what I like to call her because her mother and father have did her a disservice. But there's a picture of her I'm looking at right now on Google, and her complexion is darker than mine. And I think that when you look at that, it's like, I don't know if they see it as they're trying to flatter us, but it's like if you saw her online and she didn't tell you that she wasn't Black, you wouldn't necessarily know.
Okay.
I think that's something that is kind of scary because it's like you're pretending to be us, but like Marquita said, when it's convenient for you, it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
but then when you're done with it, you take that off. Same thing with the braids and the cornrows. It's like when Kim Kardashian had cornrows, she was calling it Bo Derek braids or
Boxer braids.
If Marquita
Yeah.
was worn that hairstyle to her interview, they might not have hired her. But a white girl
Mm-hmm.
can wear it and it's cute, or they can wear big hoop earrings and what's the earrings, like the door knockers. I love door knocker earrings. I wouldn't wear those to work because somebody might look at me and go, oh, she's ghetto. But if a white girl was to wear it, oh,
Right.
that's edgy. So that's the part that I hate that.
So the big thing that I'm noticing, and for myself, I think it fits my personal definition as well. All four of you have mentioned the word convenient, and I think that's kind of the biggest line. That I think is the line where appreciation versus appropriation is, because I think at the end of the day, um, some people genuinely are who they are, right? If you grew up around the culture, if you've never known anything but, like, for example, if I'm Black but I grew up in a Hispanic neighborhood, or if I'm white and I grew up in a Black neighborhood, or if I'm Indian and grew up in a Chinese neighborhood, or whatever, if that was all growing up, that's what you learn from. You've taken part in that culture since day one. You know what I'm saying? And that's if that's who you are day in, day out, Sunday through Saturday, you know what I'm saying? That's not really appropriation for me, especially if you're admitting that, like, hey, this is where I grew up. These are the people that I've been around, and you're giving credit and you're giving respect, to those people. To me, I think the biggest, example of appropriation comes, like you said, like all four of you said, when it's convenient. And like, to me, when I think appropriation, the biggest examples that pop out to me are Miley Cyrus. I don't know if you guys remember, when she came out, she was on the Disney Channel and then she was doing her own country music thing. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she started hanging around Black people and being in every hip hop video and making rap songs, hanging out with Juicy J and wearing Jordans all the time. Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, all that was gone and she was back to being normal.
And she
And
actually, not to cut you off, she actually said, "Oh, I'm done with that. I don't want to do that anymore. It was fun."
right,
Like something.
exactly.
I'm like, huh?
It's like, you can't pick and choose like who you are. There's a difference between doing different genres of music, that's fine, but completely changing who you are and changing your personality to kind of fit, especially because that was the point in time where her career, I feel like, blew up the most. That's when she kind of became a household name and everybody knew her. Back then it was just kind of, younger people knew who she was because of the Disney Channel. But then everybody started to know who she was because, that's when her career blew up. Or the exact same thing with Katy Perry. I don't know if you guys remember when she went through her little hip hop phase as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, she was hanging out with the Migos, she was hanging out with Juicy J, she was hanging out with everybody. And then all of a sudden, boom, she went back. So I think, we as Black people have no problem accepting somebody else when we feel it's genuine, right? I think people like, Robin Thicke or like even Justin Timberlake, stuff like that, Black people never really had that big of a problem with. You know what I'm saying? Because like they were, doing R&B, they were hanging around us, but it didn't ever feel like they were abusing certain things, except for when Justin and the Janet Super Bowl situation. But we don't got to dive too deep into that. But outside of that, there wasn't really a big issue. And I think it was Shantae that mentioned Eminem a little bit earlier. Most Black people haven't really had a big problem with Eminem. I think a lot of people have respected his rapping ability. You might find the occasional people who might have a problem with Eminem. And then I think the biggest culprits of all, obviously what you mentioned, Mickey, is the Kardashians. I think year in, year out, Khloe, Kim, Kylie, everybody, you know, they all want the black features. They got the black lips. Kylie became a billionaire off of that. They all became millionaires off of that. You know, the braids. I think at one time they were doing the like the little do-rags or the scarves, like the bonnets and the headscarves that black women wear at night. They were doing something like that and renamed it something else as well. Um, that's what I think of appropriation. It's like you're clearly using this to gain, but that's not who you really are. You clearly stole that from somebody else and passing it off as your own idea. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was gonna say something to the Kardashians. Kim came up with a shapewear line and she named it Kimono, and she got a lot of backlash from it from the Japanese community, and she kind of, to me, seemed like she was shocked. And I'm like, how can you be shocked? Kimono, that's something like, how did your team, to me it's kind of like I'm not what's the word? I'm not trying to demonize them, but sometimes it's like you can't be that aloof that you didn't know that may offend someone. And she has a whole team of people. For one person like me to do something and say, oh, I didn't know, I can maybe sympathize with that. But you have a whole team of people with phones and internet and Google, and nobody said, hey, you might not want to do this. So I saw the episode recently, and she was just like, I don't understand why people are so upset. And I'm like, because you're biting off of this and you're not giving anything back to it. You're not even paying homage to it.
But if somebody like that, if you grow up since day one as a baby in one of the richest neighborhoods in all of America, in, you know, Southern California, surrounded by mansions since you're 4 or 5 years old, you know, you might not to give them a pass, because everybody knows I hate the Kardashians, but you might not have been exposed to certain cultures the same way regular everyday people who might have grown up in ethnically diverse neighborhoods. You know what I'm saying? So she has a whole team, but they also might be the same type of people as her that just literally might be ignorant, which is a problem itself. Ignorance doesn't excuse them, but at the same time, you know, that
But my
could
whole
be a
thing with
factor.
that is that you could argue ignorance is whatever, but and it only comes to mind because I remember seeing this episode recently. It's a really old episode, Kardashian episode. Some people may remember it, but they actually had neighbors come over and they were rappers. And when I tell you, it was literally the definition of cultural appropriation. Kris Jenner, she was literally mocking them, saying, oh, dog this, and oh, should we put on some rap music? It was blatant. So you could say that it's ignorance, but back in the day, they clearly cashed in on it. So you have to know the difference. And even then, even if you didn't, you had that episode then to where you would know better now.
Joseph, I got a question for you to kind of, you know, take it towards Mark. Either you about to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say one thing. I agree with all of your points, but my point with the Kardashian is like Mickey, like what you were saying earlier. I think as Black people, we're more accepting of people who adapt to our culture, and I think we're too forgiving. And this is why I'm gonna say this, because when we see the Kardashians and we see them take certain features like wanting to have big lips or really big butt, but before it was disgusting to have a really big butt, or it didn't look nice when you wore tights to show your thighs or whatever the case may be, we would get upset and we would be like, well, why is it acceptable when these women do it, but when we do it, we got to cover up more, or we can't show this, or we can't show that, even though it's natural. But I think now in the media, because she knows where she stands, I think when she does certain things like, okay, let me free this African American so y'all can forgive me for a week, and I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna come back again so y'all forget about it. And I think for Black people, I think we're just so on the fence, because I think some people fail to realize that if we don't stick together, we'll never win, right? So they think like, oh, I can only buy a waist trainer from one of the biggest celebrities out there because she's a celebrity and it works. I can't go to the local African American shop and buy it because I may not like their customer service, or I don't like the way they did this, or it's too expensive, or whatever the case may be.
Careful, you
so
dropping some dimes.
So I think we're just so on the fence of where we need to be as far as where the Kardashians are. I mean, and I'm saying that as a whole because like you, I don't pick and choose. One week I like them, one week I don't. I don't like them at all. And it's because of the culture that they adapted. And I hate that, like Mickey said, I hate that they can get away with certain stuff, but when I walk out and do the same thing, I'm looked at in a negative light. That's the one thing I don't respect and I won't respect. And I think as a whole, or African American community, I don't think that we know how to really just draw the line and kind of be done.
Had a little militant type of vibe coming there from you there. I actually,
because I mean,
Joseph,
you gotta think about it. Like, if she goes and she does something and the media adapts, like for example, the last time that she freed an African American woman or whatever, and said she put all this work in, and then you get Sean who said no, she put money in, she didn't put no work in. But we like,
that's a
oh,
good
thank
point.
you, Kim, we love you, Kim. Like, she doing this for our community, and such not doing this for our community. But then when she come back out and say, hey, I'ma sell whatever I'ma sell, then you mad because
So a
she
couple
just
of things there. There's a couple of things to unpack. Joseph, I do still have a question for you, but I'm gonna get to that in a second, just because I like where Marquita took this discussion. I got a couple of questions there. Number one, you mentioned at the beginning of your spiel that there was, you know, they kind of got credit for, you know, having the big butts when at a time it was considered, you know, inappropriate or unclassy, unladylike, you know, to walk around with, you know, the big butt has always been generally associated as being a black feature, a black woman feature. And I think back even before the Kardashians, when I was growing up, as you know, we all are 90s babies here, but except for Mickey, she old. But anyway, I was going to say, I'm just kidding. But no, but even before the Kardashians, I remember as a kid, Jennifer Lopez was the one that actually got credit for having a big butt cool. You know, she was the one that kind of like, oh, wow, being curvy is actually sexy, when black women have obviously been doing it since the dawn of time. I mean, you had black women like Pam Grier in the 70s, you know what I mean? Different things like that. But she was the one that kind of.
I think that's different because of where she grew up in the culture she has already known, and she's a Latino woman. So, I mean, some Latino woman has the same features as far as big lips and
they do,
big butts,
but
depending on where you go. And I mean, Jennifer Lopez, I think she does the same thing as the Kardashians do, but she just doesn't get the heat for it.
Well, so I was gonna say, like, to me, I actually like Jennifer Lopez. So growing up, I think she has been. I think occasionally, sometimes she has crossed the line just a little bit, but I wouldn't say that she's ever done anything to the same aspect of where the Kardashians is. Because like you said, she grew up in the Bronx, she grew up around black people, she grew up around Latina people, and obviously, you know, there's a big African influence in the Latin community as well. You know what I mean? And like you said, a lot of them have the same type of features as black women do as well. You know, I don't think she ever really was abusing, you know, like, for example, so she grew up, you know, she first got her name by being, you know, in Living Color, being a dancer, right? You know what I'm saying? She was welcomed by the black community at that point, and then she did, you know, Selena with, you know, obviously for the more Latin roots and different things like that. But I was just talking more so at the point because she was a curvy woman, and she kind of got credit for kind of boosting the big butt culture, you know, pre-Kardashians, when black women should have gotten the credit that they deserved on that there. So that was the first point. Go ahead, Shantae.
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. But I mean, that kind of, I guess I can speak to both sides of that because I'm Black and Puerto Rican. My mom is completely Puerto Rican. I'm telling you, she could pass for a white woman probably. But and then I grew up with her. So people, they see me and they see Black first. Point blank period. They see Black first. But then, like Marquita was saying, I always, when I was younger, always got asked, why do you speak the way you do? You speak like a white person, because I enunciate my words. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it's those things. And then when Marquita was saying you go into an interview, I literally never go into an interview with my hair straight, because I want you to know what you're getting. I'm not going to sit here and pretend or this, and not saying that it's bad or anything like that, but I want to be upfront. So if I don't get the job, I know later on down the line, I'm not going to face scrutiny or anything like this. Well, why don't you straighten your hair, this and that and the other, because that's going to be a whole nother problem. So
do you think that that's hurt you in any way?
I don't, I think maybe immediately it might have, but in the long run, I don't want to work for a company that only sees me for my hair.
Okay.
So I think that I gain something in integrity that I don't necessarily gain monetarily. And that's more important to me. Granted, we all have to make money, but I'd rather work for a company that sees me before my hair and sees my qualifications like anyone else.
Yeah, I think the whole talking white thing is something that we've probably all experienced at least one time in our life by, ignorant people. If you got any type of good grades in school, or you know, ever did anything intellectual, for some reason it was already automatically labeled white. But that's for a whole
Yeah.
nother episode. We can dive into that. But I know we're kind of, going into a long amount of time here. I know Mickey wanted to keep it short. I know we're already past the 30-minute mark. But Joseph, I had one last question for you before we kind of wrapped the whole round table up here, because you're not only black, you're not only African American, but you're also African as well. Do you think, and I was thinking about this as we go, because over the last, let's say maybe 6 7 years, I think there's been a big trend of everybody trying to get closer to their roots, and everybody, I mean the black community. I think a lot of us have embraced the natural hair, embraced a lot of the you see people doing African spirituality. You see people wearing the traditional like African materials and garments and different things like that. The what's it called, excuse me, the dashikis, or like when people graduate, they have the kente cloths on them, different things
Mhm.
like that. The Black Panther movie that came out. Do you think that there are cases of black people who might not be directly from Africa? Obviously we're all from Africa, but not like directly from Africa. Do you think there's cases of us as a group culturally appropriating people that do come directly from Africa? Do you think that it's abusing the African culture, or do you think that that's just simply appreciation?
Um, yes. That doesn't answer the question, because it's a both and, right? I think I think you might have commented on this, because when Black Panther post came out, I made a post about it, asking that same exact question, as I looked at different premieres across the globe, actually, and how people were attending it, how they were celebrating it, etc. Um, so I think understanding, one, that there's no such thing as African culture, in the sense that there's African cultures,
Absolutely.
because the continent is so big. Um, and so seeing people wanting to return back to their roots by appreciating, yet without educating themselves on African cultures, was a little disheartening, because at the heart of cultural appropriation is fetishizing, right? Fetishizing
Ooh.
of other cultures, whether it's Native American, when you see people dress up in Halloween, or
Hmm.
as you mentioned, Mickey, it's a fetishizing with a lack of understanding, to kind of safeguard you from making this a sort of toy. But at the same time, I think that what I think I will bring to this discussion is the fact that we have to have a global scope of the world. And in America, we kind of are really myopic in our view, because everywhere in the world, people have interacted with other cultures. They've gained things from other cultures. Tea is a big
Absolutely.
across the world because of India. Like, so
Spices too.
yeah, exactly. So I think we really need to not be so quick to pull the cultural appropriation gun, and just think about how globally they're today, because the world is so small, because of the internet, social media, we have all gained from other cultures. And so I think that's something that needs to be part of the discussion when we're talking about cultural appropriation.
I agree. All right, Mickey, any last thoughts on your end before we let these lovely people go on about their lives?
I was gonna ask if everybody wanted to do, because we got so many like different branches on this tree in this episode. I think that I just wrote some notes down, so I'll hit you guys up afterwards to see if you guys want to maybe do like a part 2 to this and discuss things a little bit deeper. Like Joseph, I wrote down the fetishing statement that you made, which I totally forgot about that, and also
Absolutely.
Marquita and Shantae, when you guys mentioned, hair going in for job interviews and stuff like that, like, I don't think that people really realize how much Black people have to change and switch and maneuver, and then we have to do this and smile. And I think that people may not recognize it because they don't see it face to face, and they don't know anyone that's gone through it. So I think that might be something, if you guys want, we can go to like a part 2 of this episode.
Oh, we're definitely gonna have to turn this into a saga at some point. We're gonna have to bring you guys back for another episode at some point in time for a part 2, or maybe even part 3, or maybe just sub conversations based on this, because we can talk about stuff like this all day long. But obviously we don't have the time. But we can certainly have separate ones. And I think, just what you were talking about, Mickey, there was a comedian, I think it was D.L. Hughley, but I could be wrong, who was saying, white people are allowed to be white all day long. Black people aren't allowed to be black all day long. And I think that's kind of what Marquita was talking about earlier at the very beginning of the episode, where, that we have to do certain things to make sure that, and what Joseph said, just to level the playing field, not even for gain, just to get on the same equation. But just to wrap things up, I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing between appreciation and appropriation is just, giving the credit. Don't flaunt something, because like Joseph said, we've all benefited. We're at a global economy. Everything's smaller now because of the internet. We've all benefited from something. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with showing love for another culture or wanting to participate and celebrate another culture. I think we all should do more of that. But but it's just like when you're writing a paper, don't plagiarize. You give the credit, you cite your sources where it's due, and you appreciate it and go on about your business. And I don't think anybody will have a problem with that. And there's certain, celebrities that we can throw out that we've already thrown out as examples. If you do something the right way, we're not going to have a problem with it. When you abuse that power, or when you try to pass it off as your own, that's where I think the line is. And like everybody mentioned, there's the word convenient. So we certainly appreciate all three of you guys joining us on the show today. We're going to have to bring you guys back for another one. And thank you guys for your time. I know you guys got to run, but absolutely. But from the Good and Terrible Show, this is signing off. My name is Travis.
My name is Mickey.
And thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe below. Let us know your thoughts. Comment down in the section below to tell us your definition, your thoughts. If you have any questions that you feel like we should cover on the next one, or any questions that you feel like we might have missed, just let us know your opinions down below. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.